Hey guys, if you're dabbling in watercolors but are just not sure what to paint, clouds and skies are such a great place to start. They don't require any drawing skills, and you can just have fun playing with watercolor effects while also creating a stunning piece of artwork in a short amount of time. For this dramatic sky scene, I'm only using 5 colors: Daniel Smith Indigo, Burnt Umber, Ultramarine, Lamp Black, and a little QOR Phthalo Blue. For best results, you'll want to use 100% cotton watercolor paper. And of course, you can check out the description below this video for a complete list of the supplies used in this project, and I'll include a link with my reference photos. Let's dive in. Alright, I've already blocked out a 10 by 10 inch square using my masking tape, and I'm using a rough pressed paper today. The reason I'm using rough pressed is because it actually can retain water quite a bit longer and stay damp longer than cold pressed paper. And I want to have that water retention because I'm going to be using the wet and wet technique quite a bit for the clouds in this painting. So I'm using my 3/4 inch flat square wash brush, and I'm just taking clean water. And you'll notice I'm actually not painting it all over the square, but I'm leaving a couple of little areas still dry. And the reason for that is because I do want to have a couple little spots that are harder edges and more distinct in these cloud formations. Now I'm not going to be exact as I study my reference photo. I'm just going to try to approximate the location of the dark areas in the clouds and where the sun is shining through. And so now I'm mixing up my combination of colors for the dark clouds. And I'm using indigo and burnt umber. And when you mix this combination, you actually get kind of a neutral gray. And the more pigment, of course, the darker the color. And the more water you add, the lighter it'll go. So I'm taking my mixture and just gently blotting it in where I see the darker shapes in my reference photo. You can see because we're working on the wet paper, the paint is spreading out nicely and forming these really soft edges, just like you would see in nature with soft, fluffy clouds. I love working with a larger brush for things like this because it helps me feel a little bit more free. I can work quickly and I don't have to worry about tiny little details just yet. It's so much fun to work this way. So wherever you see light shining through in your reference photo, that backlit effect with the sun coming through the clouds, just avoid those areas with your paint. And you can already see little sections in the painting where the water and the paint are not flowing, and that's those little spots that we left dry. Anywhere on the paper that you leave dry, the paint will not touch. So that's a great way to plan ahead to avoid the whites. I'm intensifying some of the dark areas in the clouds by just adding more indigo, more pigment, making it darker. And then I'm using little smaller, more specific brush strokes. You can even use the little corner of your large brush to produce smaller brush strokes. And just gently dabbing. And because our paper is still wet, it's all just blooming and flowing so beautifully. You can see we're starting to imagine the sun poking through right there in the center, and we want it to just be so bright it's almost blinding the viewer. So all the areas of clouds around it should be just a little bit darker in value, and the sunshine needs to be the brightest point in the painting. So I'm just continuing to add these cloud shapes, working wet and wet. And again, because we're using rough pressed paper, it's holding that water for a long time. Here towards the bottom, I'm being a little bit more specific with brush strokes, doing some little horizontal brush strokes. Generally, towards the horizon line in a sky painting, you'll see the clouds starting to flatten out almost, and so that's what I'm trying to imitate with my brush strokes here. Now I've mixed up a combination of phthalo blue and ultramarine, and with this more bluish mixture, I'm starting to suggest little pops of the blue sky, maybe showing through some of those heavy dark clouds. Just dabbing it in here and there in just little sections. I'm mixing up a more intense mixture of those same two colors, and here towards the bottom of the painting, I'm adding some downward angled brush strokes. The flat brush works so well for these. If you want to get more specific straight edges and cover a large area, this brush works so well for that. And you can skim your brush side to side to create that horizontal look of the skyline. I'm not being super specific here because this area is going to be covered up with our foreground. We'll have to let that dry first, of course, before we add the mountains in front. So just throw in some color. And because it's a little drier here, you can see where the brush is just kind of catching on that surface. You can finish that out as little or as much as you want. Just remember, this area will get covered up with the silhouettes in the foreground. I've rinsed my brush completely, and now I'm starting to pull out some sun rays. While the paint is still wet, this works really well. Take your clean, damp brush and wipe it across the surface of the paper. You can use a little bit of an aggressive arm strength here as you pull that paint out, and that's lifting the paint out and creating these sun rays. Be sure to rinse after each brush stroke and dry your brush on the towel before lifting any more paint out again. And then while the paint is still wet, I'm just darkening up a couple of these clouds one more time. With the wet and wet technique, be careful not to press too hard into the paper, or as you've seen, you will actually lift the paint out. We only want that to ever be intentional, right? So just be delicate with your brush strokes as you work wet and wet, unless you're lifting the paint. I've switched to my 1/2 inch flat brush here to again lift out some more streaks of sunlight coming through the clouds. You can also do this after the surface layer has dried. You just have to re-wet the paper again before lifting the paint out. So once again, I'm rinsing and then just pulling my brush across the surface, lifting that paint right back out. In order for this effect to work, you do need to make sure you have high quality paper. Cotton watercolor paper is best. You can try it with a cheaper paper, but I can't guarantee you'll get the same results. Play with these effects as little or as much as you want. I'm pretty happy with that. So now I've let this whole thing dry, and I'm coming back in with my size 8 silver black velvet round brush. I'm mixing up a really dark mixture of blue using indigo and ultramarine. And this is going to be the color I use for the first layer of mountains in my silhouette. Now I have 2 reference photos. One photo is for the sky, and the other one is what I'm referring to for my silhouette, my skyline with the mountains. I'll include a link to both of those in the description below this video. Of course, I encourage you to collect your own photos, find your own references, and create pieces of art that are distinctly yours. But hopefully this video is giving you some ideas for creating your own dramatic backlit skies. So using the tip of that round brush, I'm just gently painting the silhouette of the mountains along the background. And then you'll want to work fairly quickly and use quicker, broader brush strokes with a little more water on your brush to smooth out that edge and let it all blend together all the way down to the bottom of the paper. So you can see I'm scrubbing that out, smoothing it out. It really doesn't have to be perfectly finished here. We're going to add another layer. And you can smooth out any extra edges that have formed. All right, I've let that first layer dry, and now I'm adding another silhouette in front of this using my Daniel Smith Lamp Black. And I've decided to add this beautiful tree silhouette just to give it some interest, to kind of draw the eye down and around. So I'm using the tip of my round brush and painting first very specific branch and trunk shapes. Whenever you paint a tree silhouette, it's a really good idea to just start with the trunk. That gives you a good skeleton and a good foundation for adding all the foliage over the top. From there, I'm just using a little dabbing, quick motion with the tip of my brush to paint the leaves. You might have to reload your brush a couple of times, but if you have a good quality brush, it will hold a lot of paint. So just use quick little brush strokes for these tree branches and for the foliage. And try to mix up the shapes. Don't make them super uniform. You don't want it to look perfectly balanced, as in nature most trees are swaying one direction or look a little lopsided. And so in this case, I'm having the tree trunk kind of bending sideways a little bit, and some of these branches are longer than the others. So give it some asymmetry to make it look even more natural and realistic. Now for the foreground, I'm filling it in a little bit more. I'm still trying to create this rather rough silhouette of perhaps grasses or bushes just beneath that tree. And so I'm using that same kind of scrubbing motion with my brush, working very lightly, just using the feather tip of my brush, but it's loaded with juicy black paint. And then filling it in with the black all the way to the bottom. You might need to dab your brush in the water to get the paint flowing again for you if it's starting to dry out a little bit. And then I'm moving over to the left side and just adding another silhouette here, suggesting some more foreground trees and hills and brushy bushes. So if you look at my reference photo, none of this is exactly like the reference photo. I've made it a little bit different. And that's okay. You have artistic license as the creator to make the image your own. Make it something unique and special, something no one else has ever seen before. If you want to, you can use some dry brush effects here, which involves just scraping your brush across the surface of the paper, and you can see some of the texture shows up, and your brush will miss certain areas, allowing the light to show through. That's what I'm doing here with some of these bushes in the front. And it looks really natural. It looks like scrubby trees and brush and bushes. Just play with these different textures in your foreground. You don't want any one thing to really stand out too strong, otherwise it will compete with the tree that you painted. But I think for the most part that looks pretty good. So now I'm rinsing my brush. And I've decided I want to add one more tier or one more level of silhouetted mountains in the background. So to do that, I'm taking my combination once again of ultramarine and a little bit of indigo, fairly watered down, not too dark. And with my round brush, I'm just gently painting one more layer of mountains in between that far silhouette and the front silhouette. Now while my black is still wet, I want to be careful not to touch the water to that, otherwise it will blur out. But if you want that effect, you can let the two colors touch and then you will get a soft edge there. So you see here the two colors are touching and it's creating a soft blurred edge. Just going to add one more little mountain on the side here. And there is our finished dramatic cloud landscape. Leave me a comment. I'd love to hear from you. And if you decide to try this project, just tag me on Instagram and I'll check it out. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you're new here, and hit the bell so you never miss any new videos. Thanks for watching.